Some legends are born from talent, others from tragedy. It was supposed to be the movie that made him a star. Instead, it became his final performance. This is The Crow.
Brandon's my family. So is Bruce. I have to know the truth.
One of Hollywood's darkest legends, a film so drenched in tragedy that even decades later, people still whisper that it was cursed. But the truth is far more terrifying than any curse. The year was 1993. Hollywood was changing. Action stars were getting older, sequels were flooding theaters, and audiences wanted something new, something darker, realer, more human. And then came The Crow, a comic book adaptation unlike anything before it. No spandex, no cheesy one-liners, just shadows, rain, revenge, and one man at the center of it all, Brandon Lee. He was 28 years old, handsome, humble, and hungry to prove himself. To the world, he was Bruce Lee's son, but to his friends, he was just Brandon, the quiet kid who loved poetry, music, and movies that meant something. This was his moment, his chance to step out of his father's shadow and finally become his own legend. He'd been offered dozens of generic action movies, but The Crow was different. It wasn't about fighting. It was about grief, love, and vengeance. A tragic story about a man who dies only to return from the grave to make things right. In a way, Brandon was perfect for it. He understood the loneliness of being remembered for someone else's legacy. And that's what made his performance feel so real, too real. But as the camera started rolling, the shadows behind the story began to spread.
Many small events led up to the final accident that happened to Brandon.
The production was a mess from day one. The studio had slashed the budget, crew members were exhausted, working 16-hour shifts for weeks on end, and the safety standards? Almost non-existent. There were reports of power lines sparking during rain scenes, nails sticking out of sets, and even crew members being injured by malfunctioning rigs. And still, the camera kept rolling. Because in Hollywood, you don't stop. Not when time is money. Then came the first sign something was wrong. A construction worker was electrocuted while setting up equipment. Another crew member accidentally drove through the studio's back lot and crashed into the set. A storm tore through Wilmington, North Carolina, flooding the outdoor locations and destroying equipment. People started joking, maybe this movie really is cursed. But nobody was laughing for long. Brandon didn't believe in curses. He was grounded, thoughtful, the kind of guy who stayed late to help the lighting team pack up. But even he could feel something strange on set, a heaviness, like every frame of the movie was taking something from him. He once told a friend, "This movie feels different."
It is a violent film. It's a violent situation, and it's a fun set.
It's beautiful, but it's draining. He said it with a half smile, the kind that hides a chill you can't quite explain. Still, he pushed through. He trained endlessly, worked with fight choreographers, studied the role. He wanted The Crow to mean something, a story about loss and redemption that audiences would never forget. And in the process, he gave everything he had. By the time filming entered its 7th week, the crew was exhausted, the budget was nearly gone, and everyone was desperate to finish. What happened next would make The Crow immortal, but for all the wrong reasons. It was March 31st, 1993, the 52nd day of shooting.
The scene was simple. Eric Draven, Brandon's character, walks into a room. He's shot by a gang member. He falls. Just another day on set. But this take would be different. The prop gun was loaded with blanks. At least that's what everyone thought. What they didn't know was that earlier in production, the crew had made dummy bullets by hand for close-up shots. And one of those bullets had a fragment, a piece of metal still lodged inside the barrel. When the blank was fired, that fragment turned into a real projectile. It had the same force as a live round. The gun fired. Brandon stumbled. Everyone applauded. The take looked perfect. But then, he didn't get up.
The Crow was close to being a doomed movie after star Brandon Lee was killed in a handgun accident.
The camera kept rolling. People thought he was acting. He was, after all, a professional. But when the director yelled cut and Brandon didn't move, the room went silent.
He was supposed to drop to his knees and fall forward so his face was towards the camera. He was lying with his head against the door and his feet facing towards the camera. When Brandon didn't get up, everyone was stunned. Then when everyone heard the medic go, "Brandon, are you all right?" the place just went, whew, it was like dead quiet. They had pulled up Brandon's shirt and I saw the wound. It was just an open wound, but you could see the blood pooling behind it. And he was pale, he was really pale. And just barely a whimper coming out of him.
Then, chaos. Crew members rushing to him, blood soaking his costume, calls for medics, sirens, panic. The kind of confusion that feels unreal, like a nightmare you can't wake from. He was rushed to the hospital. Doctors fought for hours, but just after 1 p.m., the news broke. Brandon Lee was dead. 28 years old, gone in an instant. Hollywood was stunned. The headlines hit like a gut punch. Actor killed during film shoot. Prop gun accident turns deadly. But for those who knew him, for his fiancée Eliza, for his mother Linda, for the crew who'd shared 51 long days with him, it wasn't just a tragedy. It was something deeper, something no one could explain. Because The Crow wasn't just about death, it was about resurrection. And now its star was gone, leaving behind a film that had eerily mirrored his fate. The news spread like wildfire. By nightfall, every TV station in America was saying the same thing. Bruce Lee's son dies on movie set. For millions, it was déjà vu, because 20 years earlier, another tragedy had struck the Lee family. Bruce Lee, a man who seemed invincible on screen, had also died young. He was 32, a sudden brain swelling, no warning, no goodbye. And now, his only son was gone in almost the same way, suddenly, mysteriously, in the middle of his prime. People didn't want to believe it was an accident. They wanted a reason, a story, something to make sense of the impossible. And that's how the whispers began. They called it the Lee family curse. Fans dug up eerie coincidences, things too strange to ignore. Bruce Lee's final film, Game of Death, told the story of an actor who is shot on set with a real bullet. In the movie, the prop gun is switched. In real life, Brandon was killed the same way. Even the scene setup was eerily similar. A camera rolling, a fake gun, a hero who never got back up. Some said it was fate. Others swore it was something darker, revenge, superstition, even a curse that haunted the Lee bloodline. But the truth wasn't supernatural. It was negligence, plain and devastating. Investigators quickly learned that the film's safety protocols were barely functional.
Actor Brandon Lee, 28, died at 1:04 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Wednesday at New Hanover Regional Medical Center.
The weapons expert had been fired just days before the accident to save money. The replacement crew had no formal training, and instead of buying proper dummy bullets, they tried to make their own by hand. Every cut corner led to a disaster, and Brandon paid the price. One safety officer later admitted,
he had a penetrating wound near his umbilicus or belly button. I know that during the surgery itself, he received at least 40 or more units of blood, and it's a relatively small wound.
if they'd spent 10 more minutes checking that gun, he'd still be alive. 10 minutes. That's all it would have taken. But in the rush to save time, Hollywood lost a soul it could never replace. The following days felt unreal. Reporters camped outside the studio gates. Fans left flowers and candles. And Eliza, Brandon's fiancée, the woman he was supposed to marry just 2 weeks later, was left shattered. They had planned a quiet wedding in Mexico. Now she was helping plan his funeral. When she saw his costume for the last time, the black leather coat, the white makeup, and the fake blood still on it, she broke down completely. It wasn't just a role anymore. It was the last thing he ever wore. But even in tragedy, the show didn't stop. The studio faced a decision: cancel the movie or finish it in his honor. At first, nobody wanted to go back. The set felt haunted, not by ghosts, but by guilt. Every light, every prop, every camera carried the weight of what had happened. But then, Eliza gave her blessing. She said, "Finish it." He would have wanted that. And with that, production resumed. The energy now was different, somber, reverent, heavy. Every scene became a memorial. Every shot felt sacred. They brought in body doubles and used early CGI, a technology still in its infancy, to complete Brandon's unfinished scenes. It was painstaking, emotional work. For the crew, every frame was a goodbye. One editor described it perfectly. "We weren't making a movie anymore. We were finishing a love letter." And when The Crow finally reached the editing room, it no longer felt like fiction. It felt like prophecy, like Brandon had somehow known this story would outlive him. In one of his last interviews, just weeks before filming ended, he said, "Because we don't know when we'll die, we get to think of life as an inexhaustible well. But everything happens only a certain number of times." When fans later heard those words, they couldn't shake the feeling that Brandon had been speaking to them from somewhere beyond. When The Crow was released in 1994, the world wasn't ready for what it saw. The movie was dark, violent, poetic, and above all, hauntingly real. Every shot of Brandon felt alive, yet ghostly. Every look in his eyes carried the weight of something we'd never see again. Critics called it the most beautiful tragedy ever filmed. Audiences left theaters in silence. Some cried, some just stared at the credits, refusing to move, as if leaving meant admitting it was over. After The Crow's release, something strange happened. It wasn't just a hit, it became a myth. People didn't talk about it like a movie. They talked about it like a message, a piece of art that carried someone's soul inside it. Every frame felt like a heartbeat. Every line of dialogue sounded like a farewell letter. Brandon Lee wasn't just acting anymore, he was becoming the Crow, a spirit of vengeance who dies only to rise again. Fans began to see signs everywhere. Murals appeared in cities across the world, dark wings, white face paint, piercing eyes. People quoted his lines like scripture. "It can't rain all the time." Simple words, yet they carried something heavy. Hope inside despair, light inside darkness. Exactly what The Crow had become for millions of people who felt unseen, unheard, or broken. And the more time passed, the more it felt like Brandon had achieved what his father once dreamed of: immortality through cinema. But for those who knew him personally, that immortality came with a cost. His friends described visiting his grave beside his father's, two names carved in stone, side by side: Bruce Lee, Brandon Lee, father and son. Two legends, one story that ended too soon. One visitor said, "It feels like they're still protecting each other even in death." And maybe that's true, because in a way, neither of them never really left. Their movies still breathe, their words still echo, their faces still look back at us from the screen, frozen in time, forever young. Years later, The Crow would inspire comics, sequels, songs, tattoos, and even movements. But none of them carried that same haunting soul. Because The Crow wasn't just fiction, it was a tragedy that became art. When you watch it today, knowing what happened behind the scenes, you can't separate the two. You're not just seeing a performance, you're witnessing the end of something and the birth of something else. Brandon once said in an interview, "A life lived in fear is a life half lived." And that line, simple as it sounds, was everything he stood for. He didn't chase fame, he chased meaning. He wanted to make his own name, not as Bruce Lee's son, but as Brandon. And in that brief, beautiful flash of time, he did. He became the kind of legend that doesn't fade, not because of box office numbers, but because of feeling. Even now, over 30 years later, The Crow still haunts Hollywood. Every time a gun goes off on set, someone remembers him. Every time a director talks about safety, someone mentions his name. And that's the cruel truth. His death forced an entire industry to wake up. Real bullets, real neglect, real consequences. It wasn't a curse, it was a mirror, showing us what happens when we forget that art isn't worth a life. The final moments of The Crow play like prophecy. Eric Draven, Brandon's character, whispers, "Buildings burn, people die, but real love is forever." Those words hit different now, because they weren't just written for the movie, they became the truth behind it. So when people ask, did the director really use real bullets? The answer is yes. And in so doing, they created more than a film. They created a warning, a masterpiece carved in tragedy, a story that reminds us that even in death, art can still breathe. Because in the end, it's not about how he died. It's about how he lived, fearless, passionate, unforgettable. And somewhere in the glow of an old movie screen, Brandon Lee still flies through the storm, whispering that same line to anyone who will listen. It can't rain all the time.